I'm sure that as business architects or any architect in general, we hear all the time, where do I invest my dollars? Where do I get the best return? How do I know that I'm moving the dial on my strategic outcomes? What projects are off course? We get these questions all the time. And leaders want that traceability, that golden thread that takes them down from the strategy to execution. But regardless of the strategy, I guess the percentage that's been out there of strategies that fail, we know it's somewhere between 67 and 78, depending on the study and the year. So I found it interesting that there was the tool that's most used by large companies is failed. And I think it's created room for innovation, and it's not going to be the quantum computing that we heard earlier, which is fascinating. But I think it's going to be basic, incremental process improvement, that there's opportunity for us in the architecture space. So that's what I'm here to discuss today. I'm Amy Browning. I've been in the business architecture role since 2006, well beyond before it was established. So I've been along with the infancy. And over the years, I really found my niche in the strategy translation. I've heard different terms for that, the deconstruction of the strategy, the communication of the strategy. So that's really my niche and my interest. Today, I'm going to go over some basic research overview. I finished my master's program in enterprise architecture and business transformation last year. And as part of that, you have to do a formal thesis. And so I wanted to share some of the findings where I think that we could have opportunity for that incremental innovation. So I'll go through some baseline concepts so that we level set on where the opportunity can be, and it really justifies why that there could be this opportunity. Then we'll do the strategy. We'll talk about strategy translation, and specifically with regards to the strategic guardrails. Go through some fun participant feedback, the words from the people who participated in the research regarding communication, and it's some of it's humorous and some of it's just really validating to what we know in our profession about what we get from the strategy, and we have to act upon it. And then some practical takeaways. So formal versus informal research. As part of the formal research, we hear about this in academics. It's really the scholarly research that's supposed to remove bias. It has to be peer reviewed. It has to come from sources that are credible. It's very stringent on the sources that you can use, because you're trying to remove bias and you're really trying to find and discover something new. Versus informal research, it could come from blogs, white papers, and other sources. Even YouTube could be like an informal. You could find some sources for informal research. So this is very much in the formal. So this was very rigorous research that went through and came up with a lot of data, but there's different sections of it. So just level set the literature review. Then there is the research, and then the analysis, and then the findings from that. So the literature review is where I went through and I thought, okay, you're supposed to look for something that interests you, because you're going to be reading a lot of scholarly research. And when you want it to be useful to you in your career. So what I did was, and I have to explain this, because I think that it really tees this up, is when you have the circles that overlap, Where the overlap happens, that's the research when you're looking across all of these hundreds of scholarly research papers. That's the things that overlap, and you can say, oh, this is very common. This has already been researched. Here's where different authors disagreed on something. So you can see where the conflict is. That's the overlap, the things that are known that's out there. What's in the center is when you blur your eyes after all that you're reading, you have to find a gap in that scholarly research. And that's when you pull that forward and you determine that's what I want to focus on, to do surveys or interviews to get the data to see if there's any findings from that. So for my research, I found that the balanced scorecard, Norton Kaplan balanced scorecard, is the most used strategy tool in 30 years. There's so much research about it. That's what makes it good to look at, right? Because you can really, you have a lot of comparisons. And what we found was that, like, there's implementation problems with the balanced scorecard. Sometimes there's a learning curve. Well, there's consultants who focus on that. So that didn't seem like there was really much there for me to research. You know, there's overlap in that. But the performance control system, same thing. When we talk about performance control systems, there were issues with the balanced scorecard, such as you couldn't account for timing delays, which makes a difference. Like if your project delivers, on time in 30 days, or, didn't deliver until, past its delivery date. So but there's a lot of fuzzy dynamic. There's a lot of analytical tools that are solving that issue. So I was like, there's not anything there. Organizational performance, that's a known issue of when you cascade your strategy down and you have those measures and what needs to be accomplished. The organization should also be taking through their annual review process of their employees, and also cascading down so that everyone has goals down that hierarchy, so that as the results come back up to that L1, they deliver what they're supposed to. There's a lot of tools in place for that now. There's also, but there's also some timing delays in that. But what came and stood out for me, and this became the center of what I just couldn't grasp, it almost seemed like everybody's been admiring the problem. Just in the last 5 years, there was almost 5,000 studies done on the balanced scorecard. It's still the most used tool. The majority of the people who use it, or the companies that don't use it, aren't particularly pleased with the tool, and they're still using it. And the main complaint is the communication tool, the strategy, what's provided for that strategy translation, isn't allowing employees to be able to know what needs to come off their plate and what needs to come on their plate. And if you can't align your organization efficiently to align to the strategy could potentially, diverge right from the point that it is cascaded. So that was the center. I really saw that there was a gap in the communication, and that's what I focused on in large, complex organizations in the US. What are the characteristics of effective communication aimed at maintaining that strategy alignment by using the balanced scorecard for cascading and communicating strategy? So what does effective strategy translation look like? And several research studies actually stated it, that to date, in all of those thousands of research papers, no one was able to articulate what effective strategy translation looked like. So big gap there to be solved. Okay. So I just want to go over the concept of a strategy control system, and I'll tie that to how it works in SAFe, just to bring it, put some more color to it. So a strategic control system is really three components. You have the strategic plan, the scorecard, which has like the high level measures for the company of what needs to be achieved over the the strategic horizon. The strategy map that comes out from that, and I'll show you the balanced scorecard, which I'm sure everyone has seen it at some point. But I don't think most people realize that the strategy map, what it is actually one component of a larger system. So it's supposed to come out from the scorecard. The strategy map, the high level map, is supposed to provide enough strategic context for the operational plans to plan how they're going to accomplish it. So you have the why on one, the what on two, supposedly what the what needs to be, and then you have the how, the operational plan. So the control portion of it are the causal loops that if the scorecard says for the first year in the strategic horizon, we're going to increase the sales by whatever. A control in that, a KPI may be that the sales process needs to increase by a certain percentage to get prospects to customers through that sales funnel quicker. Well, that would be the causal loop that when the solutions on that are executed and they come to maturation, it should be able to produce those insights that allow leaders to know if they're on track or off track for that 1 year contribution back up to the strategic plan. Okay, so the why, what, how, and how much is supposed to all be connected in a model to feed those decisions back up. So if you know you need to course correct or not. So that's the concept of a strategic control system. It's highly sophisticated, right? That's the utopian state that has to be achieved to answer those questions that we get all the time, to be able to run the scenarios. And how that looks within SAFe, I just took a snapshot of it here, is you have your enterprise strategy that comes down, the business strategies that come out of that, the business architects, if they have them, will be able to break that strategy down, produce the roadmaps, the PPTI insights, have the strategy translation blueprints that have the barriers to which provide the strategic context. That should go into the portfolio backlog and enable the lean portfolio manager to know what needs to be pulled forward for PI planning. The features are broken down. The stories are executed. The results of those come to maturation to know, did this set of stories meet the acceptance criteria for the features? If yes, and the same thing with all the features under that, it should feed back up and say, did we meet what we said we were going to do? Yes, then we can close out the epic. So that's how it's supposed to, I just wanted to tie it together that like, this is how this alignment down and traceability back up is supposed to work. And a lot of us have been in the SAFe environment. So I just wanted to provide some perspective to that. Okay, so this is the strategy map from Norton Kaplan. I'm sure most of us have seen this a dozen times or more. And I just want to point out that the balanced scorecard wasn't always a strategic control system. When Norton Kaplan first produced it, it was really just the measures piece of that in that column. And in 2009, Norton was quoted as saying he realized by just producing the metrics, it became a bottoms up alignment for performance indicators. So he realized the mistake, and that's when he put together the different levels, the objectives, and put the strategy map together with the targets and the initiatives. And he thought that this then provided the top-down direction. He fully expected that this is what was going to be able to line the organization. In a large organization, or even within a small organization, just looking at this, I think most of us know, we've been talking about the levels of abstraction today. So I feel like everything is kind of tying itself together today. We couldn't have planned this better if we did, but the levels of abstraction are contextual, conceptual, logical, and physical. We probably talk about this together, or in our way of working, or even when we're looking at different documents, different diagrams, we can tell, logical and physical, or how we're doing our creating our capability maps, breaking down the families from L1 to L4. It's the same concept. Why, what, how, and with what. And what that means is, as the strategy is being decomposed, that's less to more context that provides the organization. So at the portfolio level, we have the high level why that's fed into it. We provide more context, the what that allows the portfolio to be able to have some decision insights, the strategic guardrails, with a prioritization, and then that can feed down to the program and the execution level. So, but when the organizational spans and layers cannot make prioritization decisions, the strategy was not effectively communicated. So this has been the main complaint in the research, is if this is what was supposed to align the entire organization and push decision making down for that alignment to get that traceability, this isn't working. So what are the characteristics of effective communication that are required? So that was the genesis of the research. And let's see, so the model, and I graded out. This was my contribution to academia. There's a model that was produced for this. I produced with the findings of this, that what effective communication of strategy looks like. And so that was great. And when I got all the analysis together, I thought my professor was going to be so thrilled about the nexus of this model being what was in the center of that initial, the overlapping circles, some contribution that I knew what, here was what effective communication looked like. But she called me and asked if I had time to call to talk. I was, I guess, the only student that had a negative finding. And I was like, that sounds bad. And she was like, no, that's actually good. Because out of everyone that I interviewed, from Fortune 50 companies to Fortune 500 companies, and over the career that I've had in my network, no one that I know of has achieved that state of having that full strategic control system. So the finding was that the BSC, the Balanced Scorecard, is a failed strategic control system. Why is that? We're trying to measure too much. And when you try to measure too much, you have so many data sources that you're trying to plug into the system. The strategy is in a repeatable process. Every year, the strategic planning process, it changes. The deliverables that are produced from that are the objects in that aren't consistent over the years. So everything's changing. So you can't have a model that's learning from each cycle to improve the decision insights that come from it. So I was like, but what does that mean? And when it came down to it, it means that it may be a failed that people aren't, or the model isn't reaching the optimum state, but there are things that we can do from once the strategic plan is produced that we can course correct, we can at least keep the strategy diverging at some degree. Not everything. I mean, you're not going to be able to keep it entirely, but what it's saying is you now know what the strategy translation needs to be. You can do your best to keep it within the strategic guardrails by doing all the other things in the model. But I didn't want to focus on that because that goes to the point of the innovation. So strategy translation, I wanted to bring this up because this was when the writing or the event description for this presentation mentioned that that there's things that are done in strategy implementation that cause a failure, akin to going to the grocery store without a list. So think about that. You're hungry, you have no grocery, you didn't do a grocery list. What happens when you go to the grocery store hungry and no list? You overspend. It becomes a very expensive grocery visit. So with strategies, if we're not providing some context of what needs to be done with the investments, you have teams that are very hungry and they will act in that they will buy something, they will do something with it. Do you know that it's within the strategic guardrails? So this is supposed to exhibit, like, if you have the strategy translation, you're trying to keep the work as much as possible within the strategic context. So Julianne and Amanda did a great presentation this morning, and they were talking about current to target state capability assessments, and the importance of that, having the heat map. And I wanted to articulate what that means using the example that I had a couple slides ago on the balanced scorecard. The image of it, just looking at that, I would have to pull like a financial management capability and assess if there's not enough strategic context. And it's so high level. If you were to create, assess it at that level, get it down to a capability roadmap, have sequencing and dependencies, the portfolio manager is going to look at you and say, how is that going to help me know which work to pull forward? Everything's related to financial management in a financial services company. Not helpful, right? So that's where you have to break the strategy down to some point, and it could be some level of breaking it down, but you have to be able to see more the context of what it's going to become, so that you can pull from the capability map, and it makes it much more effective if you're pulling like a level 3 and level 4 capability, because you know more about the strategy, assessing that, heat mapping it, putting it on a capability roadmap. That allows the more decision insights for the portfolio to know what work to prioritize. So the participant feedback. This was fun. So I'm going to start with the communication portion, and some of this is just validating that what we have seen and heard over the years, but documents are real high level strategy, but they're usually mom and apple pie kind of stuff. It could be any company in any industry. I actually had a data mapping for mom and apple pie because so many people use that terminology. So I was able to group like comments to that. The golden thing to do is to have it in one sentence, but no one will never understand what you put into that one system. And I have an example of that. I was working, it was a modernization effort just to the presentation right before. And it was so high level. The strategy objects were so high level. The objects were not cleanly scoped. So I came up with a strategy statement, which came right after the vision, which provided so much context, direction to help scope it. And in an executive session with the L1, the strategist who had worked with me backed down when the executive said, that's too much information. And this is what I tell executives. These views, as much as I love executives and I love you, this isn't for you. It's for the 6 levels beneath you who will never meet you in person. This provides them eventually the strategic context so they can make decisions and know and see how their work is tying to the work that you say is important. They see you in your town halls, your employee meetings, and it makes them feel that connection. And so it's not for you, it's for all of them. And usually that's how I get them to, oh, got it. I can have my portfolio version, my one pager that I can speak to my fellow executives. I get it. Your versions need to have more context. So I just love when you have to, oh, I just want to see that in one sentence. There's, a lot about ambiguous statements that don't let you prioritize alone. Then there's the questions, how is this going to affect me? And there was a strategist who said that she had actually feedback. She was like, what does this mean? Am I less important? Am I more important? And those high level documents that come out, they'd be like, oh, we're going to be the leading digital provider or whatever. And she had a call center manager call her and she was so upset. She was like, so are we, leading with digital? Does that mean that we aren't going to be, or that we don't have jobs? She's like, no, and she realized that there wasn't enough context to that really helped the organization understand what it meant to them. So she said that was a great lesson learned. Oh, the language one, I wanted to call that out. Language didn't always resonate with the leaders. They were often asking, what do you mean by? And there's a lot of us trying to learn to speak to others. There was a lot about language and, colloquialisms and, how I act with my peers and speak on a daily basis. It's almost becomes regional between like different accents, between if you're in Texas. If you hear, someone from Beaumont, they have this accent that that they are not from Central Texas. Like you just know that. Well, there's a lot of language barriers that happen. And I heard a strategist who was he did a lot of war gaming for the C-suite and the board. And he said he was in one of the C-suite executive, what do you call them, executive council or whatever. He was in his office and they'd been friends since he was, when he was just like, lower down in the company. So they could have real talk together. But, my colleague asked him, he's like, so what do you think about Paul? Paul was a new EC member. And he said, oh, that Paul, he's got a lot of runway. And he said, I stopped for a second, like, oh, that's just executive speak again. And he was like, what do you mean by that? He's like, oh my God, yeah, I forgot who I was talking to. He was like, and what it ended up meaning after he drove, pulled it out of him was, Paul had earned a lot of respect from his peers since he's been there. He's going to have, some time to be able to get, the changes that were done within his organization. But that's a lot of, so it's just different ways of, speaking amongst our peers. So the communication it's a barrier. Frequency, heard once a year, maybe at quarterly planning, and that it just wasn't enough. They weren't hearing enough about the strategy. And the availability, this was fun. I have no idea where the strategy is. If I search for it on the internet, which ought to be simple, I get nothing. And then I omitted some of this. It said, theoretically, it goes to all the executives, but half of them couldn't find it if you held up, and I omitted it. And then one interviewee, she was being funny about it. And she was like, I don't know what it is. She's like, can you tell me where the strategy is? So I tagged that as invisible strategy. That was my data mapping, because I had so many people telling me that they don't even see the strategy. Sharing seems to be and this was with regards to executives, is keeping it close to the vest, and it's only distributed on a need to know basis. And I can definitely relate to that. I had 1 year that the strategic plan was taken off the wiki, and the operational plan wasn't released the entire year. And it was a year of just, churning, and everybody asking, why haven't we seen, what happened, to the, do we have a strategy anymore? So I definitely relate to everything that I heard from that. And also, one person said, it's embarrassing. Go to that strategy site right now, and it's still an old version. Somebody could act on old strategy. So all of this feedback brought me to my time in innovation. I once led an innovation team, and when we first were standing up, we thought we were going to be like in disruptive technology. And what we found was there was so much low-hanging fruit with process innovation that's where we started focusing, and we can make a lot of strides and show a lot of value. So there's a lot of value in looking at the low-hanging fruit. And as a result, the CEO was named Innovator of the Year for American Banker magazine. So think about it. Innovation doesn't have to be jump the curb innovation. It could be the basic things. And I was watching a video with some of the other leaders that we've seen speak here today, and a couple others. And I just brought together the research that I was doing, and I was like, there has to be something to this. And that's where I came up with practical things that we can do to keep that strategy as much as possible. Think it comes out from the strategic plan. If we can keep the strategy from diverging even the slightest amount, it's more than the competitors likely, because no one has achieved that utopian state of the full strategic control system. So how do we keep it at least from diverging less than our competitors? So until we can reach, the other state of having that system in place, I came up with some things that we can do in the workplace to keep the strategy from diverging. So communication, own the communication, changing comms plan. There is so much that you can do to be structured to ensure that you're documenting how many times you're going to achieve it, to communicate it, in what venues, in what format, and then you can just at least have a plan to be able to go out and communicate it. Capture a sliver of the what is better than nothing. And I've heard this from business architect over and over again. I can go in and I do a quick and dirty translation, and it is more than what the portfolio is used to getting. And they're so pleased to have some guardrails there. And it became like the little niche of doing it that I came up with a wiki to be able to have others that could go in, non-architects, to be able to go in and capture some of the what. So I thought that was, something that we all can do, is to help others to be able to make sure, as like a catalyst, to be able to enable beyond architects to at least put some strategic context to the strategies. See communication preferences. Not everybody likes to be communicated to in the same manner. There's some people who would like to have a one-on-one. Some people would like it have, in writing. Some people like to be able to demonstrate, play back what they heard, to be able to ensure that they are hearing you appropriately. And that's to communicate in various ways and account for regional and multinational culture and language. I've heard some funny stories, unfortunate stories about communications that went out. One was a huge flub that went to trying on LinkedIn to congratulate, the team for accomplishing something, and it was apparently not appropriate for the other culture, and it was embarrassing. Request feedback, and this is the test on what I communicated, taking into account communication preferences, ways communicating in various different ways, where they were able to prioritize based on what was provided. Earlier in my career, I would, especially when Agile SAFe was being implemented, I would have my data and how I was breaking down the strategy, and I would work with the portfolio team and say, if I give you this, does this make sense? And we would change the different columns, and I would, test what I was providing them. Were they able to act on it? So that's just an easy way. And also, I think it feels like you're building a bond with the portfolio team. They see you as an enabler to the prioritization. Build in transitional continuity. I heard from a couple of the interviewees that a best practice for them in the strategy to operational planning was to have the same executive who was participating on the strategic planning also participate on the operational planning, to a certain point. And it ensured a knowledge transfer, and it also had the continuity, the context of what he was trying to achieve. And in my world as a business architect, that's been the way that I've done it, when it's the what to the why, and I have a transition of having probably the L2s in the room that have the high level target state definition. They provided that. And then you bring in like the product managers, the actuaries, you bring in the people who are boots on the ground, who understand what it really takes to make that happen, and say, okay, if this is the target state definition, what does that mean to you? And they'll be like, they can ask questions of them. Did you mean this? Or, what did you mean by that? And then, okay, well, If that's what it looks like and feels like at that level, it'll look like this at a more detailed level, which then enables us to pull the right capabilities to be able to assess them. So I really like the concept of having that overlap to be able to build in the continuity. And then considering the downstream consumers, if there is ways that, kind of like I was describing before, like if they say that the operational planning team likes to use the OGSM model, the people who are doing the strategic plan, in order to make sure that there's continuity between those, the deliverables can be adjusted to use some of the strategic object titles so it feeds into the OGSM model. It just makes it easier and to ensure that it's being consumed appropriately. And then the frequency, there is no saturation point on communicating. One interviewee said she told the CEO, he was like, I'm just tired of talking about it. And she was like, my coaching to you is when you get tired of talking about it, that is your clue that you need to talk about it again. Keep talking about it and people need to hear it. In the operational space, there's all kinds of ways to build in that strategy continuity. A strategist said that she would, if somebody emailed her with an idea or did something, she would respond to email and say, great job at achieving that, how you're aligning that to the whatever strategic objective, so insightful that you were able to build upon that that strategic objective. So like just making that connection point on a daily basis, one-on-ones, recognitions, there's all kind of meeting interactions that can remind people of the strategy, their portion of the contribution, and make them feel rewarded for tying themselves to the strategy. Accessibility, it just should be obvious. The strategy should be made available. But I get it. It seems to be a cultural thing that needs to be overcome industry-wide. I don't know. It's just mystifying to me why a strategy would be produced and then be held close to the vest. But as leaders, we owe it to the organization and to our teams that if we have accessibility to it, we build the views from that. It's the layer down, and we can mirror that back to our senior executives to get that alignment that is the middle layer. So, but when it's published, it needs to be current, and we need to remind employees often where to find it. So my final words on that, and this is my quote: if achieving a strategic control system is a utopian state, one must give consideration that the new innovation playing field for architecture is simply minimizing strategy divergence better than the competition to some small degree. So that is my presentation, and I'll open it up to questions, comments.
Thanks, Amy. That's just completely blown me away. That's an amazing presentation. There's so much stuff. Not quite sure how to fit it all into my brain at the moment, but I'll get there because there's so much of what you just talked about relates directly to what I do, and it's great having that sort of, I guess, academic or research-based sort of lens applied to it. So we've got some real information rather than just going by gut feel. So that's amazing. Thank you. There's a question from Roman that came in. It was a while back in the presentation, so but, hopefully we're not sort of repeating anything. But he said, why do you think most of the other students felt the BSc was successful? positive bias towards HBS, inability to get honest perspectives, etc. What are your thoughts on that?
The students or the scholarly research before? I'm sorry, the volume was kind of low and I couldn't hear the entire question, Daryl.
Yeah, it said, why do you think most of the other students felt the BSc was successful?
It was actually the companies. It was companies surveyed. I want to say it was almost like 1,300 companies were surveyed, and they were not happy with the balanced scorecard. And for some reason, the Norton Kaplan has become so popular. So I don't have the answer to that because I wouldn't choose it based on, all of the feedback. If I didn't have that context on how to fill that void between the strategy map to the operational planning, huge gap there. So I can't answer that question, but Bain recently just put out a study again and said, they stated, even Bain stated it is for 30 years, it has been the most popular management tool despite all the complaints about it. I think it's just one of those popular things. And plus, it's fun. Like I think the one page, executives like those one pagers, but to do the hard work to do the connectivity and a model between the operational plan and in those causal loops to get that feedback system, that's the hard work. And it's very, very expensive to plug all those different data sources into the strategy map or into the model.
Yeah, good point. And I'm absolutely positive we're going to run out of time because of all the questions I've got here, but perhaps we can sort of find out a forum to share some questions and answers later. There's a question about whether or not things like the balanced scorecard and the result set from that, whether or not anybody's attempted to overlay that against some of the sort of more low-level exercises like the creation of customer journey maps, and whether or not there's some correlation that could tell us about an organisation and its connection or disconnection from its customer base. Perhaps we're measuring the wrong things, that sort of thing.
That is an issue as well. And I feel like there could be a whole research study on that. That's an excellent question. For a long time, I had experienced strategists. So the corporate strategy would be done. And then once we knew the different courses of action that needed to be taken, we had experienced strategists that would go out and survey the members, really scour the market place broadly. And then they would come out with that outside in view, the customer journey map, but they actually had the target state definition that would be like, when you're successful, the customers will be able to do X, Y, and Z. And there would be the journey maps that went along with that, which then could be transferred to a knowledge transfer, a warm transfer to us, then to do the strategy translation to say, okay, if that's the outside in view, this will be everything that we have to do internally to meet those external conditions. And so it was a nice marriage between the two. It's like exactly the experienced strategist was sitting there after we got it the strategy translated, then I was doing a warm transfer to the solutioning team, and they were going after bite-sized education. And I was able to say, because there was that warm transfer between, I was like, the bite-sized education only had a 3% click rate. Do we really want to spend a whole lot of money integrating all of that advice into all three experiences that we're embedding this into? So that was a great question. It should be standard practice that you have that outside in view before you start determining. But that's that what layer that there could be that marriage if you have the luxury of having that talent and that role and that muscle flexed within a large organization. I really miss those experienced strategists.
Yeah, it's, as you say, it's worth digging into that one and understanding it better, and seeing some more practical applications of that approach. A question came up around incentives, and whether or not you've noticed any sort of incentives that might be either counter to the things that are being measured through the scorecard, or potentially creating little reinforcing loops, so you become quite insular in being incentivized to get the outcomes on the scorecard, but not really understanding how the world's changing around you. Did you see anything along those lines?
The only way that I can connect this, and I don't know if I'm going to answer the question appropriately, I think that in my mind, that relates to the executives' incentivization, their bonuses to be able to take whatever they committed to for those annual, to have those controls. But the same thing is like when you cascade down the strategy, it should then cascade down from the L1 all the way down, so that, on the review cycles, are you meeting your 1%, your 1%, and as that 1% adds up, that they achieved what they were supposed to do. There's lots of, and I had so much data, and I almost went down that track, Daryl. So that was so intuitive that you asked that question, but it would have been another 6 months to be able to produce that research. But I have the data, and my research professor, when I was done, she was like, if you ever want to, go do another research study on that, we have the data. And I'm like, I can't even read after this process I've been through. To that point, and I'm glad that there's so many questions. This is my passion. I love talking about this. If anybody wants to connect on LinkedIn, we can have, I'll set up a lunch and learn where we can get on and we can answer and talk about this and get more ideas about how we can, at a basic level, be able to, or the easy things that we can do together as a community to keep in alignment with those strategic outcomes.
Yeah, that's a great point. And yeah, lunch and learn, that sounds great. Except we might need to do something slightly different, because I think I'm 12 hours opposite you, so I don't want you doing it in the middle of the night. Yeah, so that's great. Look, there's a bunch of other questions. I think I might take them offline, because I'm just conscious the next session's a panel and we need to get people set up for that. But yeah, I love the points around, the idea of just enough architecture. Just, Wendy talks about that a lot. Just do some stuff so that you can show some value, and then get the, the trust to go and do more. And I imagine you sort of reinforce that message.
Absolutely. Yeah, you put a nice period on that. Thank you for articulating that.